Case 1. The murder of Joan D'Alessandro. She was just 7 years old, doing something as innocent as delivering cookies, when her life was stolen by someone the whole neighborhood trusted. What followed was a tragedy so shocking, so heartbreaking, it would haunt her community for decades and spark changes in the law itself. This is not just another true crime story. It's one of the most powerful, chilling, and unforgettable cases you will ever hear. If there's only one story you watch today, let it be this one. The last cookie delivery. Joan D'Alessandro was the kind of child people in Hillsdale, New Jersey, never forgot. Born on September 7th, 1965, she was the youngest in a devout, close-knit family, with 2 protective older brothers and parents who adored her. Their quiet suburban street felt safe, almost immune to the troubles of the outside world. Joan thrived here. She loved ballet, excelled in school, and threw herself into the Girl Scouts, where she'd learned everything from tying knots to selling cookies door to door. On April 19th, 1973, Clean Thursday, her Baptist school was closed for the holiday. The spring air was mild, the neighborhood peaceful. 7-year-old Joan spent most of the day outside, playing in the yard while her mother kept watch from the house. By afternoon, only a few boxes of pre-ordered cookies remained to deliver. Around 3 p.m., Joan spotted a neighbor pulling into their driveway. Without hesitation, she darted inside, grabbed the last boxes, and told her mom she'd be back in just a few minutes. Those few minutes never came. At first, her mother thought little of the delay. It was common for kids in Hillsdale to wander between yards, stopping to play with friends before heading home. But as the hour passed, unease began to creep in. Rain rolled in briefly, and she assumed Joan might be waiting it out at a neighbor's house. The rain stopped. Joan didn't come back. By the time Joan's father returned from work, her mother's unease had hardened into dread. He jumped into his car, driving street after street, scanning sidewalks, yards, and driveways for any sign of their little girl. Nothing. Frantic, her mother tried to piece together where Joan might have gone. The delivery list she'd been using was nowhere to be found, likely taken with her. But one detail stuck in her mind. Joan had mentioned that the customer she was heading to had just pulled into their driveway in a new car. That narrowed it down. Only one family nearby had recently bought a vehicle. While her husband kept searching, Joan's mother knocked on their door, and then several others. Each neighbor she spoke to shook their head. No one had seen Joan that day. She returned home, empty-handed and terrified. When her husband confirmed he'd found nothing either, the awful truth sank in. They picked up the phone and called the police. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The search that consumed a town. The moment officers heard Joan's mother's story, they knew every second mattered. They mobilized instantly, launching a massive search effort that pulled in not only the local police but the fire department as well. Crews fanned out across the neighborhood, while officers went door to door, expanding their sweep to a radius of several miles. No one had seen Joan. It was strange, unnerving. The street leading from her home connected directly to a busy shopping center. Cars passed through constantly. Yet somehow, not a single driver or pedestrian recalled seeing a small girl carrying boxes of cookies. As word spread, the quiet suburb transformed. Dozens of residents, friends, neighbors, people who barely knew the family, showed up to help. With each passing hour, the number of searchers swelled. By midnight, the urgency reached higher authorities. The FBI and state police were called in. Search dogs followed Joan's scent from her belongings, but the trail went cold almost immediately. Volunteers scoured abandoned buildings, wooded areas, empty houses, parks, and the lakeshore. Nothing. By the early hours of the morning, the idea that Joan had simply wandered off seemed impossible. She knew her neighborhood, she never strayed without permission, and she had promised to be back in just minutes. Her mother was certain this was no accident. At 3 a.m., exhausted crews paused, planning to resume at first light. When dawn broke, the search became even bigger. It felt like the whole town had turned out. Mothers who couldn't leave their children at home cooked more than 2,000 meals for those in the field. Nearly every local police officer joined in, along with 250 firefighters from surrounding towns and multiple FBI teams. They checked everything, every house, every yard, every garage and shed. They combed through brush, fields, and culverts. Still, Joan was nowhere. Then, finally, a flicker of hope. Less than a mile from Joan's home, a searcher spotted a small shoe. Nearby lay several empty boxes of the same cookies Joan had been delivering. Police hurried the shoe to Joan's mother, but her answer was immediate and certain. It wasn't Joan's. Investigators soon determined the cookie boxes had been there for weeks, weathered and forgotten. Later that day, local parents identified the shoe. It belonged to their child. Just like that, the lead collapsed. And as darkness fell once more, searchers were back where they started. Nowhere. By now, the FBI was leaning hard toward foul play. Joan's mother had already visited every house where her daughter might have delivered cookies. Not one neighbor had seen her or the cookies anywhere. But she had a hunch. Before Joan left that afternoon, she'd mentioned her next delivery was to a neighbor who had just pulled into their driveway in a brand new car. Only one household in the neighborhood fit that description, the McGowans. So Joan's mother went straight there. Answering the door was 26-year-old Joseph McGowan, who lived with his mother and grandmother. He said he hadn't seen Joan, but something about him unsettled her. She couldn't explain why, just that her gut told her something wasn't right. Detectives had already spoken to Joseph, and he denied everything. But his alibi was shaky. He stumbled over the details, contradicting himself in small but telling ways. On paper, though, Joseph didn't look like a suspect. He had no criminal record, a job as a high school chemistry teacher, and a spotless reputation in the community. Still, the uneasy feeling among investigators only grew. They decided to bring him in for a polygraph test. Joseph agreed. The results were damning. On nearly every crucial question, the operator flagged signs of deception. The police couldn't use it in court, but they could use it as leverage. They told him he'd failed and pushed harder. Hours later, Joseph cracked in a way no one expected. He asked to see a priest. After a private conversation, Joseph came back and began to confess. He said he'd been mowing his lawn when Joan walked up with the last of her cookie orders. He invited her inside to pay for them. Cookies, he claimed, that he'd ordered weeks before. Then his story veered into the bizarre. Joseph said he suddenly realized he didn't have the right change, and that this inexplicably sent him into a spiral. In what he described as a moment of shame and frustration, he grabbed Joan, dragged her to his bedroom, and began striking her. What followed were acts so disturbing, detectives struggled to keep their composure as they listened. They didn't believe his reason for a second, but they let him keep talking. The murder and the mask he wore. When the violence was over, Joseph McGowan was faced with the reality of what he had done and the fear of what came next. He later claimed panic set in. If he let Joan go, his life would be over. so he made a choice that would seal his fate forever. After several failed attempts, Joseph killed the 7-year-old girl. He wrapped her small body in an old sofa cover and carried it to the trunk of his car. Back inside, he scrubbed away the blood in his bedroom, stuffing the rags into a bag. Then he drove 20 miles into New York State, heading for a national park. Once there, he carried Joan into a remote stretch of woods and placed her behind a large rock. On his way home, he scattered the incriminating evidence, rags, cleaning supplies, into random trash bins along the route. By the time he returned, Joan's mother was already knocking on his door, searching for her daughter. He feigned ignorance. Hours later, he even joined the search efforts, walking alongside neighbors and police, knowing exactly where she was. When his confession came, Joseph shared something that made even seasoned investigators shudder. Despite the brutality of his actions, he'd been completely calm that night and slept soundly. Still, detectives focused on finding Joan. Joseph provided detailed directions to the hiding place, and within an hour, searchers located her body exactly as described, behind a rock in the park's dense woods. The autopsy exposed the lies in Joseph's account. He denied sexually assaulting Joan, but the forensic evidence was conclusive. She had suffered multiple injuries and bruises, and while his description of the cause of death matched reality, the state of her body told a darker truth. Joan had been found completely unclothed, yet Joseph stubbornly denied the assault even when confronted with this fact. For those who knew him, the revelations were almost impossible to process. Friends, family, and colleagues described him as a well-educated, respected chemistry teacher. Parents had trusted him with their children. Now the mask had been ripped away. Hillsdale itself was in shock. Crowds gathered outside the McGowan home in the days after his arrest. Most stood quietly, but police barricaded the street, fearing someone might lash out at his mother or grandmother. Some residents were so enraged, they began flipping through phone books, cold calling strangers with the same last name to vent their fury. The harassment became so relentless that several innocent families lodged formal complaints. The quiet suburban peace was gone. In its place was grief, rage, and the chilling knowledge that a predator had been living in their midst all along. From bail to a battle for justice, the anger in Hillsdale reached a fever pitch when news broke that the judge had set Joseph McGowan's bail at $50,000. For 1973, it was an enormous sum. But for Joan D'Alessandro's devastated community, the number wasn't the issue. The thought of him walking free, even temporarily, and living just a few houses away from the family he had destroyed was unthinkable. Hundreds of residents flooded the courthouse with letters demanding the bail be revoked. Some were fueled by fear, others by rage, and not all of them wanted him kept inside for the court's sake. Some wanted him out so they could take justice into their own hands. Under immense public pressure, the court reversed its decision and revoked bail altogether, even though Joseph's family had already scraped together the full amount. He would remain behind bars until trial, kept in solitary confinement for his own safety. Other inmates had made it clear they wanted a chance at him. Months later, the trial began. Joseph pled guilty to Joan's murder, but continued to deny any sexual assault, portraying the killing as a sudden, inexplicable act. "I don't know what came over me," he told the court. The prosecution wasn't buying it. Psychiatrists who examined him painted a far darker picture. Their evaluations revealed a man who had harbored deviant fantasies for years, hiding behind a facade of respectability as a teacher and neighbor. The moment an opportunity presented itself, they said, He acted without hesitation. Investigators also doubted Joseph's claim that the crime was unplanned. The remote rock formation where he hid Joan's body felt too specific, too deliberate to be chosen in a panic. They suspected he had known about the spot long before and had it in mind as a disposal site. In the end, Joseph was sentenced to life in prison. But there was a catch. Under the law at the time, even someone convicted of murdering a child could still be eligible for parole. Nearly 20 years later, that nightmare became reality. Joseph applied for parole, shocking Joan's family, who hadn't even realized it was possible. Their lawyer warned that if they didn't actively oppose it, there was a very real chance Joseph would walk free. It was a terrifying prospect, especially since prison psychiatrists now described him as no longer a threat and pointed to his spotless prison record as evidence he could re-enter society. Joan's mother refused to accept it. She launched a relentless campaign, not only to keep Joseph behind bars, but to change the law itself. For years, she lobbied, testified, and fought to make sure that no family would face the same risk again. Her determination paid off. New Jersey passed a law making anyone convicted of murdering a child under 14 in the course of a sexual assault permanently ineligible for parole. Just a year later, thanks in large part to her tireless work, a federal version of the law passed as well. What began as a mother's fight to protect her daughter's memory became a nationwide safeguard, ensuring that predators like Joseph McGowan would never again walk free. A mother's legacy. Joan's mother never stopped fighting. In the years after McGowan's death, she continued to push for stronger protections for children. She succeeded in raising the age limit in her original law from 14 to 18 in New Jersey. She also helped pass legislation eliminating the statute of limitations for murder in the state. She founded a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children, an organization that has saved countless young lives. Every action she takes, she says, is to honor Joan's memory and ensure that no other family endures the same nightmare. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time. Case 2. The Disappearance of Kim Langwell. The Vanishing of Kim Langwell. A 25-year mystery finally solved. Kim Langwell seemed to have everything finally falling into place. Born on Christmas Eve 1965 in Houston, Texas, she was known for her fierce determination and warm personality. As a teenager, she gave birth to her daughter, Tiffany, and raised her alone after Tiffany's father walked out of their lives. Kim eventually moved to the quiet town of Beaumont to build a better future, working 3 jobs just to get by before landing a stable position at a local oil refinery. That job brought some stability and romance. It's where she met Ken, the man who would become her fiancé. Together, they looked forward to building a life with Tiffany, who by then was a spirited 15-year-old. On the evening of July 9th, 1999, Kim was supposed to meet Ken and Tiffany at a restaurant for dinner. She'd called Tiffany around 5:15 p.m. to confirm their plans and mentioned she had a quick errand to run before heading home. But that was the last anyone heard from her. By 6:30, Tiffany and Ken were waiting at the house, but Kim never showed. They called her repeatedly. No answer. It wasn't like her to vanish without a word. As hours ticked by, worry turned to panic. At 10 p.m., Ken couldn't take it anymore. He jumped in his car and retraced the route Kim would have taken home from work. He stopped at shops, drove past familiar streets. Nothing. Then he spotted her car, It was parked outside a pharmacy, but Kim was nowhere in sight. He searched the area but found no clues. Trying to stay calm, he told himself maybe she had left with a friend or changed plans unexpectedly, though deep down, he knew something felt terribly wrong. When morning came and the car was still there, untouched, abandoned, Ken's worry became dread. Kim hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't contacted anyone. He immediately called the police. Detectives sprang into action. Their first stop, Kim's car. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. But one chilling detail stuck out. Her cell phone was still inside. Kim had vanished, leaving behind the one thing she never went anywhere without. Then came a critical lead. Tiffany told investigators her mom had mentioned she was stopping by someone's house after work, a man named Terry. He wasn't a stranger. In fact, Kim had dated Terry for 7 years before ending the relationship about 6 months earlier. Still, they stayed in contact occasionally. That night, Terry had asked Kim to help him with a home project, just to hold some shelves while he mounted them. Tiffany even called him the night her mom disappeared. Terry claimed Kim had stopped by briefly and then left. But as police would soon discover, not everything in Terry's story added up. And for the next 25 years, the truth behind Kim Langwell's disappearance would remain buried, until one unexpected break in the case finally unraveled the mystery that haunted her loved ones for decades. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The dark secrets behind Kim Langwell's disappearance. As investigators dug deeper into Kim Langwell's life, it quickly became clear. Her relationship with Terry had been far more volatile than anyone knew at first glance. In the early days, Kim's friends thought Terry seemed like an okay guy, but that illusion didn't last long. Over time, his true nature began to surface. Aggressive, controlling, and possessive, he bombarded Kim with phone calls, demanding to know her every move, who she was with, where she was. He wanted control, and he wasn't subtle about it. Even minor disagreements could explode into full-blown arguments. Eventually, Kim decided she'd had enough. But ending things with Terry wasn't as simple as walking away. He begged. He threatened. One moment he was promising to change. The next he was warning her of what would happen if she left him. Still, Kim summoned the strength to end the relationship. But Terry wasn't done. He didn't lash out openly, but he stayed close. Too close. He kept in touch, just enough to make sure Kim knew he was still there. She confided in friends that she was afraid of cutting him off completely. She worried what he might do to her, or even worse, to her daughter. The more detectives spoke with Kim's inner circle, the more disturbing the picture became. Near the end of their relationship, Terry's behavior had escalated to physical violence. In one chilling incident, he choked Kim during a heated argument. After that, her fear deepened. She started to believe he was capable of something far more sinister. In a moment of vulnerable honesty, Kim told her friends, "If I ever go missing, start by digging in Terry's backyard." Given all this, and the fact that Kim had seen Terry just hours before she vanished, detectives zeroed in on him. He was now their prime suspect. But Terry stuck to his story. He insisted Kim had only stopped by briefly to help him install some shelves, then left. Nothing more. He claimed that later that night, around 4 hours after Kim's visit, he went to a local bar and stayed there the rest of the evening. But Terry's timeline had a glaring problem. He had no alibi during the window when Kim disappeared, and given his violent past and apparent motive, investigators were convinced they were on the right track. They obtained a search warrant and scoured Terry's home and property from top to bottom. Every drawer, every inch of the backyard. They brought in forensic teams, dogs, and cadaver units. But nothing turned up. No body, no personal belongings, not a drop of blood. It was as if Kim had simply vanished into thin air. They also took another hard look at her car, hoping to uncover forensic clues. Again, nothing. Without physical evidence, the case against Terry stalled. And just when it seemed like they'd hit a dead end, another name surfaced: Frank. According to Kim's friends, her boss at the oil refinery had made her deeply uncomfortable. It started subtly, casual flirting, lingering stares. But soon, things escalated. Despite being a married man, Frank began sending Kim love letters. Not just one or two, over 100 of them, pleading with her to give him a chance, trying to charm her into starting a relationship she never wanted. Kim was unnerved. She feared that rejecting him might cost her the job she'd fought so hard to get. The pressure weighed heavily, but Kim wasn't naive. She saw the danger, and she made a decision that now seemed almost prophetic. She gathered all of Frank's letters and gave them to her closest friends. "Hold on to these," she told them, "in case anything ever happens to me." The obsession that wouldn't die when detectives opened the stack of handwritten letters Kim had handed over to friends just in case. What they found chilled them to the core. The pages made one thing alarmingly clear. Frank, Kim's married boss, wasn't merely infatuated. He was obsessed, and that wasn't all. Kim had told her friends something even more disturbing. Frank had started stalking her. He would drive past her house multiple times a day, sometimes creeping by slowly, other times parking across the street to just sit and watch. The fact that Kim was already in a relationship with Ken, her co-worker at the same company, didn't seem to deter Frank at all. He acted as if the boundaries didn't apply to him. With all this in hand, investigators began to view Frank not just as an inappropriate boss, but as a possible predator. Kim had vanished shortly after leaving work, and Frank had multiple motives. Maybe his obsession had reached a boiling point, and he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Or perhaps he feared Kim would report his behavior to HR or worse, to his wife, and decided to silence her before that happened. Police brought Frank in for questioning, but the man who had penned over 100 love letters now claimed he barely had feelings for Kim. According to him, it was nothing more than a passing crush that fizzled out long ago. Then, with a straight face, he denied writing the letters at all, despite detectives having the physical evidence right in front of them. To say his behavior was bizarre would be an understatement. Frank also offered an alibi. He said he'd been shopping and handed over a receipt from a local store time-stamped at 6:56 p.m. It was something, but not enough. Kim had finished work around 5 p.m. and vanished sometime shortly after. That left a wide window before Frank's alibi kicked in. Later that evening, he hosted a poker night with friends who backed up his story. But that key hour, between when Kim left work and when Frank was accounted for, remained unexplained. Detectives were suspicious. But once again, they hit a frustrating wall. No forensic evidence, no eyewitnesses, no physical link tying Frank to Kim's disappearance. With nothing to hold him on, police had no choice but to shift their focus. They tried other avenues. Surveillance footage from businesses and traffic cameras along Kim's expected route yielded nothing. They combed through her phone records. Her last call had been to Tiffany, her daughter. After that, silence. Attention turned to search efforts. Police teams, volunteers, even local residents joined the hunt. Appeals went out through TV and newspapers begging for tips. Still, no breakthrough. But soon, troubling new reports began to surface about someone they'd already looked at. Terry. Kim's sister, frustrated by the lack of progress, decided to confront Terry face to face. Her family had long suspected him, and now she wanted answers. But Terry's reaction was baffling. Not only did he seem detached, he mocked them. He showed no sympathy, no concern. Kim had vanished without a trace, and her ex-boyfriend couldn't even pretend to care. Then came a revelation that changed everything. One of Terry's own employees came forward. Terry ran a small business from his property, and his office was on site. The employee told police that on the day Kim disappeared, he arrived at Terry's home around 5:50 p.m. and saw Kim's car parked in the driveway. He didn't see Kim herself, but her vehicle was unmistakably there. That detail cracked open a major contradiction. Terry had claimed Kim only stopped by briefly, just a few minutes, and then left. But if she'd left right away, her car shouldn't have still been there 35 minutes later. Someone was lying. And for the first time in weeks, detectives felt like they might finally be closing in on the truth. A trail of lies and a case gone cold. Until one crew came knocking. The case took a sharp turn when new witnesses came forward with a chilling detail. Several people reported seeing a tow truck, one registered to Terry, parked suspiciously near the pharmacy where Kim's car was found. The sighting occurred around 6:45 p.m., right in the middle of the window when Kim vanished. That timeline directly clashed with Terry's claim that he'd been home all evening. It was damning, yet frustratingly inconclusive. There still wasn't a single shred of physical evidence to tie Terry to Kim's disappearance. No fingerprints, no blood, no body. Despite the troubling inconsistencies, the case began to lose momentum. Days turned into months, months into years. And though the trail grew cold, Kim's family never wavered in their belief. Terry was responsible. His behavior only deepened their suspicions. In one unsettling phone call to Kim's family, Terry said he was thinking about taking a polygraph to clear his name. Then, with unnerving nonchalance, he added, "But I'll probably fail it." He also continued to call the family sporadically, not to express concern, but to ask if they'd heard from Kim, as if she had just run off and would eventually come home. It was bizarre and cruel. Even more disturbing were the silent phone calls. For years, someone repeatedly called Kim's relatives, never speaking, only breathing on the other end. They were convinced it was Terry. But again, police had nothing to connect him to the harassment. Then, 3 years after Kim vanished, a deeply unsettling confrontation occurred. Tiffany, Kim's daughter, was walking down the street when Terry suddenly approached her. He started asking if she'd heard anything from her mother. Kim's sister quickly intervened and told him to back off. That's when Terry dropped a bone-chilling remark. "Aren't you curious which polygraph question I failed?" It was the one where they asked if I killed Kim. Alarmed, the family called the police once again. But as before, there was little they could do without evidence. And so, the investigation ground to a halt. Years passed. The file collected dust. Until, in early 2024, a spark reignited interest in Kim's case, from an unexpected source. Oxygen's true crime documentary team picked up the story, determined to get answers. They launched their own investigation, starting with interviews of Kim's family and close friends. Then they turned their attention to to the two men at the heart of it all: Frank and Terry. Frank agreed to talk, but even 25 years later, his story remained riddled with denials and odd behavior. He once again claimed he had no romantic interest in Kim. No letters, no obsession. He stuck to his original version, despite the stack of handwritten notes that proved otherwise. Frank continued to insist he had nothing to do with Kim's disappearance. Then the crew turned to Terry. Unlike Frank, Terry refused to cooperate. He ignored requests, dodged messages, so the documentary team decided to confront him face to face. When they showed up at his home, the scene was something out of a thriller. Terry spotted the cameras through a window and bolted. He darted out the back door and tried to flee in his car, but the crew had blocked his escape route. Cornered, Terry had no choice but to face the questions. He claimed he wasn't trying to run, that he hadn't seen them. But his actions told a different story, and so did his answers. Terry insisted he had no reason to hurt Kim, that he wasn't upset about the breakup. But this clashed with everything Kim's family had told investigators about his threats, his obsessive behavior, his violent past. And then came the most damning moment of all. Terry changed his story. He had always told police that Kim stopped by that night to help him put up shelves. But during the documentary interview, he claimed something entirely different, that she had come to pick up the rest of her belongings. It was a blatant contradiction, and it caught the attention of investigators. After 25 long years, the case was officially reopened. The confession, the discovery, and the justice long denied. For more than 2 decades, suspicion had followed Terry like a shadow, and after the Oxygen True Crime documentary aired, public outrage surged. Prosecutors decided it was time to act. Even without direct physical evidence linking Terry to Kim Langwell's disappearance, the pattern was undeniable. The stalking, the threats, the lies, the failed polygraph. His story had changed. His behavior had raised every red flag imaginable. Authorities were now preparing to charge him with murder, hoping that a trial would finally bring the truth to light and perhaps prompt new evidence to emerge. Then, out of nowhere, the case cracked wide open. A new witness came forward after watching the broadcast. What they told investigators would change everything. According to the tipster, Terry had once confessed to killing his ex-girlfriend and burying her on his own property. With that explosive revelation, detectives moved quickly. They obtained a search warrant for Terry's home and brought in a full forensic team, equipped with state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar. Dozens of experts combed the property inch by inch. And then, they found it. Beneath the concrete floor of Terry's bedroom, radar revealed a suspicious patch about the size of a human body. Something else was off. The rebar in that section had been cut away, unlike the rest of the foundation, which was fully reinforced. It was clear this part of the floor had been tampered with. Investigators broke through the concrete and began to dig. Just below the surface, wrapped in a blanket, they discovered human remains. They didn't need the lab to know who it was, but within days, forensic experts confirmed what everyone already feared. It was Kim Langwell. After 25 long years, she had been found, buried beneath the floor where Terry had likely slept every night since her disappearance. Terry was arrested and charged with murder. For the first time, prosecutors had exactly what they needed. The victim's remains buried on the suspect's property, just as Kim had once warned her friends. Today, 67-year-old Terry sits in jail, awaiting trial, which is set for the spring of 2025. But the legal battle doesn't end there. Kim's daughter Tiffany, has filed a civil lawsuit against him, seeking damages and aiming to strip him of the resources he might use to mount a defense in the criminal case. As news of Terry's arrest spread, the original investigative team came under fire. After all, Kim had told multiple people, "If anything ever happens to me, look in Terry's backyard." And that's exactly where she was. So why hadn't they found her in 1999? Some speculate that police may have searched the yard, but missed signs of earlier digging. Others believe Terry hid Kim's body elsewhere initially, only later entombing her beneath his bedroom floor, after investigators had already moved on. Whatever the case, justice is finally catching up with Terry, and after 25 agonizing years, Kim Langwell's family has laid her to rest. What was once a haunting mystery is now a murder case heading to trial, with answers, long overdue, finally beginning to surface. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time. Case 3. The Killing of Céline Figard. The Road to Nowhere. Céline Figard's life began in the quiet French town of Bezons on May 23, 1976. Nestled not far from the Swiss border, it was the kind of place where families knew each other by name, and trouble was rare. Céline grew up surrounded by love, her parents, 2 brothers, and a sister. Her father worked the land, and the children spent long days outdoors, helping to keep the family farm alive. At school, Céline was bright, athletic, and popular. Sports filled her afternoons, and her circle of friends was wide. When she was 14, her parents took her to Britain. She fell in love with it instantly. The language, the culture, the energy. From that trip onward, she dreamed of making a life there. Inspired by her cousin, a hotel manager in the UK, she set her sights on a career in hospitality. After school, she studied accounting at a local university, but Britain kept calling her back. Every chance she got, she crossed the channel to visit her cousin. One summer, he even helped her secure a short-term job at a hotel, giving her a taste of the life she hoped to build. By December 1995, at 19 years old, Céline decided to spend Christmas in Britain once again. But that year, French rail travel was in chaos. Strikes and disruptions made train service unreliable. Her parents arranged an alternative. A family friend, a truck driver making a delivery to England, agreed to take her as far as Folkestone. From there, she would travel 150 miles to Fordingbridge, where her cousin's hotel awaited. On December 18th, she set off, planning to arrive that evening. Her parents expected a phone call to confirm she'd made it safely, but the hours passed in silence. She didn't own a mobile phone, so they could only wait. Finally, the phone rang late that night, but it wasn't Céline. It was her cousin. She hadn't arrived. He wanted to know if her plans had changed. Panic began to set in. Her parents contacted the police. French authorities immediately reached out to their British counterparts, who launched a search across 2 countries for the young woman who had vanished somewhere between the Channel and the quiet English countryside. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The Last Ride. The investigation's first priority was to retrace Céline's final journey. Her parents, now in England, told detectives about the family friend, a truck driver, who had agreed to take her as far as Folkestone. Police found him quickly. He confirmed that he had dropped her there before heading in a different direction. While at the truck stop, he had met another French trucker bound for Newbury, about an hour from her cousin's hotel. This second driver offered Selene a lift. Detectives tracked him down too. He told them that once they reached a Newbury truck stop, Selene tried using a payphone to call her cousin, hoping he could collect her. For some reason, she couldn't get through. By then, it was already 4:30 p.m. The driver suggested she take a train, but the nearest station was dozens of miles away, and his delivery route wouldn't allow him to take her there. Trying to help, he began asking other truckers if they could give her a ride. The first man he approached refused. He was planning to rest before his next trip. But the second man agreed. He said he was heading to Salisbury, just a half hour from her cousin's town, and told Selene she could likely catch an 8 p.m. bus from there. With few options left, Selene climbed into the cab of his truck. From that moment, her trail went cold. Detectives tried to find this third driver, but the details were scarce. The man who had handed her over didn't know his name or license plate, only that the truck was a white Mercedes. He described the driver as about 35, with short blonde hair and a beard. Something about his demeanor had felt off. Uneasy as he was, the driver had still let Selene go with him. She had no other way forward. The face in the sketch. As suspicion zeroed in on the mysterious third driver, detectives worked with the witness's description to produce a composite sketch. It was released to the media, splashed across newspapers and broadcast on television. The first two truckers who had helped Selene were thoroughly vetted. Their alibis were airtight. Both men had been in other locations at the crucial time. But the third driver? His story contained a glaring red flag. He told Selene she could catch an evening bus from Salisbury to her cousin's town. Police discovered no such bus existed. It was days before Christmas, and the image of a young woman vanishing during the holidays struck a deep chord with the public. Across Britain and France, her disappearance dominated headlines. The case also triggered a chilling fear. Was this the work of a serial killer? Over the past 2 years, several young women had been murdered in the same region. Investigators were already working on the theory that one man was responsible. Now they feared Selene had joined his list of victims. Authorities launched a massive search. More than 100 officers joined the hunt, supported by helicopters and even a plane scanning from above. Teams focused on the route the unknown driver was believed to have taken with Selene, but no trace emerged. For a week, the search turned up nothing. Police and Selene's family made repeated public appeals, urging anyone who recognized the driver or had seen her to come forward. Every tip ended in disappointment. Then, on the morning of December 29th, a call came in that froze investigators. A man driving near Worcester had pulled over to adjust his windshield wipers. Walking along the roadside, he spotted something unusual, partially hidden under snow. He stepped closer. It was a body. Shaken, he drove home and called police. Officers arrived quickly and confirmed it was the remains of a young woman. At first, they suspected it might be a local missing woman last seen leaving a nightclub, but that theory fell apart. By the next day, December 30th, the grim confirmation came. The body was Selene Figare, a body by the roadside. It was Selene's cousin, not her parents, who took on the painful task of identifying her. From the start, investigators noticed something strange. The highway where her body had been found ran almost in the opposite direction of her intended destination. That detail only deepened their suspicion that the third truck driver, the last person known to have been with her, was the killer. None of Selene's clothes or personal belongings were at the scene. It was as if she'd been deliberately stripped of anything that could help police trace her final hours. The autopsy told its own grim story. She had multiple bruises and abrasions consistent with heavy blows. There were clear signs of strangulation, and the medical team confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. But there was no biological evidence, nothing that could link the crime to a suspect. One finding chilled detectives. The condition of the body suggested it had been left beside the road only about 24 hours before discovery. That meant she could have been alive for most of the 11 days she was missing. Or just as likely, her killer had kept the body with him. The second trucker recalled something unsettling. The suspect's vehicle had an industrial freezer in the trailer. It was entirely possible he had used it to store her body, keeping it cold for days. Even so, police had no solid lead on the man's identity. Then Céline's parents mentioned something that caught their attention. She had been carrying 2 bottles of French champagne, Christmas gifts for her cousin. Those bottles, like the rest of her belongings, had vanished. The champagne was a rare French brand not sold anywhere in Britain. If those bottles surfaced, they would be instantly recognizable. Investigators decided to turn that detail into bait. They sent the information, along with photos of identical bottles, to the media, hoping someone might have seen them or been offered them. Perhaps the killer had shown them off, unaware of the risk. But the lead went nowhere. The bottles, and the man who likely took them, remained missing. The first mass DNA sweep. With no new leads, investigators made a bold move. In January, they launched the first mass DNA collection in British history, even without finding the killer's DNA on Céline's body. The net was wide. Police focused on drivers of Mercedes trucks and similar models, testing more than 5,000 men over the next month. Most volunteered their samples. A smaller group refused, and detectives quietly flagged them for deeper scrutiny. The case dominated headlines in Britain and France. Thousands of tips poured in, but none broke the case open until mid-February. A man called police after seeing the composite sketch on TV. It looked, he said, exactly like his co-worker. Stuart Little, 36, a truck driver. The detail that made detectives sit up. Stuart drove a Mercedes with a refrigeration unit. A background check revealed an extensive criminal record, though all for non-violent offenses. Investigators approached him cautiously, framing their request for DNA as a standard part of the mass screening. Stuart refused. The refusal only sharpened suspicion. After repeated requests, Stuart finally agreed to give a sample. With his DNA secured, police obtained a warrant to search his truck. Inside, they found the first hard evidence: bloodstains on the mattress in the sleeping area and elsewhere in the cab. Forensic testing confirmed it belonged to Céline Figure. That was all detectives needed. Stuart Little was placed under arrest. Closing the trap. The search of Stuart Little's truck had already yielded damning evidence, but detectives weren't finished. A warrant for his home uncovered an even more incriminating find: Céline's personal belongings, the very items she'd had with her the day she vanished. In the garage, officers turned their attention to his tachograph, the device truckers are required by law to use to log their driving hours. The data told a story. On the day Céline's body was dumped, there was a deliberate gap in the record. Stuart had erased part of his movements, but he'd made a fatal mistake. After disposing of the body, he'd gone back to work without covering the missing entries. The gap lined up perfectly with the estimated window in which he had transported her remains to the roadside. During his first interrogation, Stuart denied everything. He claimed he had never even met Céline, but when police brought in the other driver, the man who had handed her over, he picked Stuart out of a lineup without hesitation. That was when Stuart changed his story. He now admitted to giving her a lift, insisting they'd had consensual sex. As for her belongings in his garage, he claimed she'd simply forgotten them when he dropped her off. Detectives didn't buy it. Then a new witness came forward. On the day before Celine's body was discovered, this person had seen Stewart near a warehouse roughly 50 miles from the dump site. He was standing beside his truck, tending a fire. It looked like he was burning something. Confronted with this, Stewart claimed the fire was to warm his frozen truck brakes. Investigators were unconvinced. They searched the area. Near the warehouse fence, they found something chilling. Celine's underwear, stained with her blood. Reconstructing the crime bit by bit, detectives pieced together the most likely chain of events. When Stuart Little picked up Celine Feiger, he drove her to a secluded location where he assaulted and killed her. Forensic evidence in his truck suggested he then kept her body on the lower bunk in his cab for 10 days, making deliveries as if nothing had happened. In one of the case's most chilling details, just a week after the murder, Stewart went home for Christmas, celebrating with his wife and children, while Celine's body remained only a few yards away in his truck. Eventually, he decided to dispose of her. Receipts showed he had bought a shovel, an axe, and a saw, likely intending to dismember her. But for reasons unknown, he abandoned that plan. Instead, he left her by the roadside. The day after Christmas, Stewart gifted 2 bottles of rare French champagne to an acquaintance. Detectives instantly connected this to the bottles Celine had been carrying as Christmas presents. Stewart claimed he had bought them from another French trucker, but no one believed him. He had also shaved off his beard around the time the suspect's sketch hit the news, an image that, before then, could have easily identified him. Investigators even solved the mystery of why Celine's payphone call to her cousin never went through. The UK had recently changed its dialing codes, and her cousin's number was still written in her notebook with the outdated code. The trial for Stewart's friends, family, and co-workers, the revelations were devastating. He had always seemed like a devoted father and a dependable colleague. Many initially refused to believe the accusations, until the mounting evidence left no room for doubt. In October, Stewart's trial began. He stuck to his denials, but the jury took little time to reach a verdict: guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Appeals and parole. Soon after sentencing, Stewart appealed, arguing that the case's media coverage had biased the jury. The appeals court rejected his claim. In 2006, he tried again, denied. By 2016, he became eligible for parole, but the board refused his release. Even after 2 decades behind bars, he still claimed innocence, and the judge deemed him a continuing danger to society. Stewart remains in prison, with little chance of freedom. Lingering questions. Stewart was eventually ruled out as a suspect in the other murders that had haunted the investigation's early days. Those crimes were traced to another truck driver, arrested in 1997 and linked to at least 2 killings. Still, detectives have long suspected Celine may not have been Stewart's only victim. But in all these years, no evidence has emerged to prove it. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time. Case 4. The abduction of Drew Snowden. The last call. Drew Snowden's life was defined by energy, kindness, and ambition. Born September 26, 1981, in the small Minnesota town of Pequot Lakes, she was the kind of person who made an impression everywhere she went. She loved the arts, drawing, crafting, and thrived in sports like basketball, volleyball, and golf. She poured herself into charity work, eager to help anyone who needed it, and her warmth drew people in. In high school, her peers voted her prom queen. After graduation, Drew left home for the University of North Dakota, majoring in fine arts. It was a 3-hour drive from her parents' house, but she made the trip often, staying close to her roots. Between her studies, 2 part-time jobs, and campus activities, she still found time for charity work. She had even joined a special university travel program, eagerly counting down to an upcoming trip to Australia. She was also in love. Her relationship with Chris had grown serious, and the two were making plans for the future. On November 22, 2003, 22-year-old Drew headed to her weekend shift at a clothing store. Later that night, she was scheduled to waitress at a local club. After wrapping up her first job, she stopped by another shop in the mall, bought a purse, and walked toward the parking lot. On the way, she called Chris. They talked for about 4 minutes, until something strange happened. Drew suddenly went quiet mid-sentence. After a pause, she said, "Oh my God, okay." Then the line went dead. Chris assumed it was a dropped call or a dead battery, but 3 hours later, his phone rang again. It was Drew's number. When he picked up, there was only silence. A faint rush of wind, the muted beeps of phone buttons being pressed. Chris called her name over and over, no answer. Now uneasy, Chris called her back, but she didn't pick up. He rang her roommate, hoping for reassurance. She hadn't heard from Drew all day, but brushed it off. Drew was probably busy with work. That reassurance shattered minutes later. Drew's roommate got a call from the club manager. Drew had never shown up for her shift, nor had she called in. For Drew Sioden, always punctual, always reliable, this was unthinkable. Something was wrong. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The clues in the parking lot. Drew's roommate couldn't shake the unease after hearing about the strange call Chris had described. Her concern grew into outright fear, and she began calling every hospital in the area. No one matching Drew's description had been admitted. It was late by then, and she decided it was time to involve the police. She explained the troubling chain of events: missed shifts, unsettling calls, no sign of Drew. But city police saw no cause for urgency. Drew was 22, an adult, and they suggested waiting a little longer before taking action. Refusing to sit back, the roommate turned to the University of North Dakota's campus police. Their response was immediate. Their first stop was the mall where Drew had worked her shift that day, the last place anyone had seen her. In the parking lot, her car was still there, hours after her shift had ended. The doors were unlocked. Inside, nothing suggested a struggle. But then, just a few feet away, officers noticed something that made their stomachs drop: a small knife sheath lying on the pavement. The find was suspicious enough for campus police to call in the city department. This time, detectives came. They requested CCTV from the lot, but Drew's car had been parked in a blind spot, completely outside the camera's reach. Determined, investigators pulled footage from inside the mall instead. They began the painstaking task of reviewing hours of video from dozens of cameras, tracking Drew's final moments before she vanished. It was a slow process in a building that size. Meanwhile, word of her disappearance swept across campus. The university quickly organized a large-scale search effort. Hundreds of students joined in, scouring streets, wooded paths, riverbanks, and isolated spots where someone might hide. or be hidden. Faculty urged anyone with even the smallest detail to come forward. The search for Drew Snowden had begun, and the clock was already ticking. The black shoe by the river. When investigators pulled Drew's phone records, they confirmed Chris's account of their last call. But the location data told a different, more disturbing story. The final call to Chris hadn't come from the mall parking lot. It had pinged a cell tower in a small town 30 minutes away. The wind and faint button clicks Chris had heard suddenly made sense. Drew was already far from where she was supposed to be. Her car was still at the mall. She couldn't have driven herself. The conclusion was chilling. Drew had likely been abducted. Days passed with no breakthrough. Detectives combed through mall surveillance while search teams scoured the city. The leads were thin until 2 days later. In Crookston, Minnesota, not far from where Drew's phone last pinged, officers found a single black shoe near the riverbank. When they showed it to her roommate, recognition was instant. It was Drew's. The discovery deepened the sense of dread. If she'd been taken, she was now miles from safety. Police spread the alert, pulling in nearby departments to widen the search. Back at the mall, investigators finally found security footage from the day Drew disappeared. There she was, moving between shops, arms full of holiday gifts, smiling. On her feet were the same black shoes now sitting in the evidence room. With this clear image of her last known outfit, detectives rewound the tapes and began scanning for patterns. Faces that appeared again and again near Drew. It didn't take long before one figure began to stand out. The man in black. As investigators combed through the mall's security footage, one figure began to emerge. A middle-aged man, dressed head to toe in black, walking with a cane. His behavior set him apart immediately. The cameras showed him entering the grocery store attached to the mall multiple times. Each time, he left without buying a thing. He didn't browse the aisles. He didn't look at products. Instead, his attention seemed fixed on the shoppers, particularly women. On footage from outside the store, the same man appeared again, sitting on a bench, watching people pass by. Then something happened that made detectives lean closer to the monitor. A young woman with a passing resemblance to Drew walked past. The man stood, left his bench, and began to follow her. Over the next few hours of recordings, the same pattern repeated. This man trailing young women around the mall. The footage was suspicious, but it wasn't enough to identify him. Investigators turned to criminal records, compiling a list of 60 local men with serious prior offenses. They eliminated anyone whose appearance didn't match the figure in the video. That left just 4 names. One stood out, 50-year-old Alfonso Rodriguez. The resemblance to the man in black was unmistakable. Rodriguez had a long, violent history. His early years were marked by chronic health problems that made school and social life difficult, especially around women. One of his legs was shorter than the other, forcing him to walk with a cane. At 21, he attempted to assault a woman who had given him a ride home, pulling a knife on her in her own car. She fought him off, but not long after, he attacked 2 more women in the same month. The court ordered 5 years of mandatory therapy. Upon release, he was arrested again for assault, though prosecutors couldn't make the charges stick. Soon after, he attempted to abduct another woman, stabbing her during the attack. This time he was caught and convicted, earning a 23-year prison sentence. Rodriguez walked out of prison on May 1st, 2003, just 7 months before Drew disappeared. His release came with supervision from relatives, who privately doubted he was ready to re-enter society. He moved in with his mother in Crookston, the very town where Drew's black shoe had been found by the riverbank. Closing in on the suspect. By day 4 of the investigation, detectives were convinced Alfonso Rodriguez was connected to Drew Snowden's disappearance. They brought him in. Rodriguez admitted he'd been at the mall that day, but denied any involvement. He claimed he'd gone to see a movie, and even named the title. But when police checked, the story collapsed. The film wasn't playing at that theater. It wasn't playing anywhere in town. The lie opened the door for a deeper search. When officers asked to look inside his car, Alfonso surprised them by agreeing. What they found turned suspicion into certainty. A store receipt revealed he'd purchased a pocket knife. The sheath found near Drew's car was a perfect match. Then came something worse. The knife itself, submerged in a bottle of cleaning solution. Forensic testing on the vehicle revealed traces of wiped blood. Technicians pulled a DNA sample and compared it to Drew's toothbrush. It was an exact match. The search turned up even more. A woman's shoe and a second knife, untouched by cleaning agents. This blade carried dried blood. Again, a DNA match to Drew. On December 10th, armed with mounting evidence, police arrested Alfonso Rodriguez for kidnapping and suspected murder. But there was still no sign of Drew, and Rodriguez refused to talk. The hunt for her shifted into overdrive. Authorities appealed to the public, pulling in more volunteers, combing Crookston and surrounding areas. Heavy winter snow choked off access to remote search zones, slowing the work. By early March, 3 months after Drew vanished, there was still no trace of her. Alfonso pleaded not guilty as trial preparations began. Few believed Drew was still alive. But with the forensic evidence stacked against him, prosecutors were confident. They could win a conviction, even without a body. The thaw. As winter loosened its grip, the snow finally began to retreat. For investigators, the change meant something critical. They could now reach the places that had been sealed off for months. Crews pushed into forests, swept through open fields, and searched along rivers and lakes. Then, on April 17th, the call everyone had been dreading came in. A few miles west of Crookston, searchers had found a body submerged in the Red River. It was Drew Snowden. The area had been frozen solid through the winter, hidden under a thick blanket of snow and ice. Only when the thaw came did her body surface from its hiding place. The medical examiner's findings were grim. Drew had bruises, knife wounds, and clear evidence of sexual assault. The cause of death could not be pinpointed. The stab wounds and marks of strangulation were obvious, but there was also a chilling possibility. She might have been left alive in that remote spot, only to die from exposure. Investigators estimated she had been dead within 3 hours of her abduction. Now, with her body recovered, prosecutors had the final piece they needed to bring her killer to justice. A death penalty case. Because the abduction happened in North Dakota, but the murder took place in Minnesota, the case fell under federal jurisdiction, and that opened the door to the death penalty, despite it being banned in both states. Minnesota's governor publicly backed the possibility, though it stirred heated debate. In North Dakota, it was the first time in over a century that a resident faced execution. The trial began in the summer of 2006. Rodriguez clung to his claims of innocence, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. On February 8, 2007, the jury sentenced him to death. The execution wouldn't come quickly. As with most capital cases, appeals and delays stretched on for years. Rodriguez remained behind bars, awaiting his fate. A law in Drew's name. For Drew's family, justice meant more than a conviction. It meant change. They threw their weight behind legislation to create a national registry of violent offenders. By the summer of 2007, the Drew Snowden National Sex Offender Public website became law, giving the public online access to the addresses and details of offenders convicted of violent crimes. Her parents were adamant. Rodriguez should never have been freed. Later, the very doctor in charge of his mandatory treatment program confirmed their fears. He had strongly opposed Rodriguez's release, recommending he be transferred to prison because he remained dangerous. Despite the warnings, Rodriguez was set loose, and within months, Drew Snowden was gone. Justice challenged. For Drew Snowden's family, the 2007 death sentence for Alfonso Rodriguez had been the closest thing to justice they could hope for. But years later, that sense of finality was shattered. In 2011, Rodriguez's lawyers filed an appeal, arguing he suffered from developmental issues. That first attempt failed. But in 2021, a second appeal succeeded, and the case was cracked open again. This time, the judge sided with the defense. He acknowledged evidence suggesting Rodriguez did have developmental challenges, and noted that his original defense team hadn't been given a fair chance to present those details during trial. He pointed to Rodriguez's troubled childhood, chronic health problems, and testimony from experts who now claimed the medical examiner had exaggerated the severity of Drew's injuries. Painting a picture, they argued, that wasn't as horrific as jurors had been led to believe. For Drew's loved ones, the legal maneuvering felt like a fresh wound. The result was devastating. Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, and a new trial was ordered. In March 2023, Alfonso Rodriguez was resentenced, this time to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never face execution. What made the outcome even harder to swallow was a disturbing fact. In 2013, during an interview from death row, Rodriguez had openly confessed to killing Drew. Yet now, he would live out the rest of his days behind bars, spared from the sentence the jury had chosen. Honoring Drew. In the face of it all, Drew's family refused to let her name fade. The University of North Dakota established a scholarship in her honor, still active today. In her hometown, they built a memorial garden, a quiet place for reflection and remembrance. Plans are underway for a similar memorial on the university campus, ensuring that Drew's life and legacy will be remembered by future generations. For her family, these tributes are more than memorials. They are acts of defiance against the man who took her life, and a way to keep Drew's spirit alive. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time. Case 5. The murder of Maylee Bush and her son Noah. A new start in Hinton Maylee Bush came into the world on February 13, 1997, in the Canadian province of Alberta. She grew up in a warm, close-knit home with her parents and younger sister, a sister who adored her and looked up to her as both protector and role model. Maylee was bright, energetic, and unfailingly kind, the sort of person others were drawn to instantly. She thrived in friendships and carried a joy for life that was hard to miss. One of her greatest passions was ice skating. From the time she was a little girl, her parents took her to the local rinks, and it quickly became more than a pastime. It was something she loved deeply. In high school, she met Cody. Their connection was instant, and before long, they were inseparable. By the time they graduated, Both knew they wanted to build a life together. Malay took a job at a charity organization supporting people with disabilities, where her compassion found purpose. The work inspired her to take the next step, pursuing a career in healthcare. She enrolled in a local college, earned her nursing degree in 2017, and returned to the charity center to continue helping those in need. Then came news that would change everything. She was pregnant. Maylee and Cody were overjoyed. Cody proposed in the middle of an ice rink, the place that had always felt like her second home. In 2020, they welcomed their son, Noah, and began the next chapter, life as a family of 3. Cody's work in pipeline construction took him all over Canada, often for weeks at a time. The constant travel meant the young family either uprooted themselves to follow him or endured long stretches apart. But in 2021, everything shifted. Cody landed a new job that allowed him to stay in one place. That summer, the couple moved to Hinton, a small, remote town surrounded by nature. It was the first time they could truly settle, plant roots, and enjoy the simple rhythm of daily life together. In early September 2021, they moved into a modest apartment in a quiet residential complex on the edge of town. Malay was 24. Noah was just 16 months old. They were happy. They were home. For a moment, it seemed like their life was exactly where it was meant to be. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The day they disappeared. On September 16th, Cody left for work as usual. Maylee stayed behind in their new apartment, caring for their 16-month-old son, Noah. His shift ended around 6 p.m., and he drove home expecting to spend a quiet evening with his family. But when he walked through the door, the apartment was empty. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe Maylee had taken Noah for a walk in one of the nearby parks, but a few things didn't add up. The stroller was still inside, and on the kitchen table sat plates with half-prepared food, as if she had started making lunch, then abruptly stopped. The unease in Cody's stomach deepened. He searched the surrounding parks and playgrounds, but found no trace of them. Back at the apartment, he began calling family and friends, hoping someone had picked them up. No one had seen Maylee that day. Calls to her phone went unanswered. The strangeness of the situation weighed on him. By the time a friend arrived to help, Cody decided it was time to call the police. Together, they scoured the area once more before officers arrived. Still nothing. The first lead police immediately began a thorough search of the apartment complex, the wooded area behind it, and the nearby streets. They went door to door, questioning residents. Before long, one neighbor recalled something curious. A woman matching Maylee's description had been seen earlier in the day, running toward the road. She wasn't calling for help, and Noah wasn't with her. Investigators requested access to the building's CCTV footage from the complex manager. They combed through hours of recordings, frame by frame. No sign of Maylee. But then, amid the footage, they spotted something completely unexpected. The break in the case. While combing through hours of surveillance footage, detectives suddenly froze on one frame. Around noon, the same neighbor who had claimed to see Maylee earlier was caught on camera leaving the building, carrying 2 large garbage bags. The sight sent a chill through the room. Officers moved fast. They headed straight to the dumpster behind the complex and began tearing open the bags. Inside one of them was a horror no one was prepared for. The lifeless body of 16-month-old Noah, wrapped alongside some of Maylee's personal belongings, including her phone. The tone of the investigation shifted instantly. This was no longer just a missing persons case. Now it was a double homicide, and their prime suspect was the man next door. The search next door. The suspect, 53-year-old Robert Major, lived directly beside Maylay and Cody's apartment. The walls they shared now took on a sinister meaning. But Cody, along with other family members, was still inside, just feet away. Detectives feared that discovering what lay beyond Robert's door could trigger a violent confrontation. To avoid that, police asked Cody and his relatives to temporarily step out, telling them they needed to thoroughly examine the apartment. What they didn't say was that his son's body had just been found in a dumpster mere yards away. Once Cody was gone, officers went straight to Robert's unit. He agreed to let them search. In the bathroom, the grim truth emerged. Lying in the bathtub, completely unclothed, was Maylay's body. The discovery ended the search, but opened the door to a far darker question. What had happened inside Robert Major's apartment that day? Moments later, he was taken into custody. The grim puzzle of that September afternoon now in the hands of investigators. The monster next door. As investigators waited for the medical examiner's report, they began digging into Robert Major's past. And what they uncovered was chilling. Robert's criminal record stretched back decades, with more than 24 charges to his name, the majority for sexual offenses. Despite the sheer number of accusations, his prison terms had been shockingly short. Over the years, Robert underwent multiple psychiatric evaluations while in custody. In those sessions, he made no effort to hide his depravity, openly admitting that he enjoyed committing these acts and took pleasure in the harm he caused. Experts repeatedly warned that he was highly likely to offend again. But the warnings were ignored. In 2016, Robert walked free. The only safeguard put in place was a public safety notice, alerting the community to his presence. He was added to a special offender registry and slapped with strict conditions. He could not live near women or children, schools or playgrounds. He was forbidden from leaving his home city, nearly 190 miles from Hinton, and required to meet regularly with police. Those measures, however, came with a built-in flaw. Under Canadian law at the time, if an offender went 1 year without a new conviction, they were automatically removed from the registry, and all restrictions were lifted. Robert cleared the year and vanished off law enforcement's radar. At some point afterward, he relocated to Hinton and moved into a family-oriented apartment complex teeming with children. Local police had no idea about his criminal past. The building's management, even if they had wanted to, had no access to such information. Nor did his unsuspecting neighbors. A quiet afternoon turns into horror. By the time medical examiners finished their work, Robert Major had already offered investigators a partial confession, and the details were enough to shake even the most hardened detectives. Alongside his own words, police gathered witness accounts and hard evidence that began to piece together the chain of events leading up to that unimaginable day. That morning, Malee and Noah took a walk to the nearby park. When they returned, the building manager approached Miley with a small complaint. Cody's muddy work boots were leaving tracks in the hallway. Maylee, ever polite, promised she'd clean the mess immediately. She went back inside, laid Noah down for a nap, and started preparing lunch. While chatting on the phone with a friend, Maylee heard a knock at the door. A man's voice, Robert's, offered to help clean the hallway. The friend didn't hear the rest, but moments later, Maylee ended the call and sent a quick text to a family member around 2 p.m. From there, the timeline turns murky. Robert has never explained exactly how Maylee crossed into his apartment, Police believe he may have lured her in, perhaps by continuing the hallway conversation, perhaps by asking for help with something inside. One way or another, she stepped through his door, and his confession began there. Almost immediately, he attacked her, attempting to strangle her. The struggle lasted nearly 10 minutes before he overpowered and killed her. Then he sexually assaulted her lifeless body. He dragged her to the bathroom, leaving her there, before slipping into her apartment to take Noah. Within minutes, the toddler was dead too. Robert stuffed Noah's body, along with Miley's clothing and personal belongings, into garbage bags and dumped them in a dumpster outside the building. Miley's body remained in his bathtub, as though he hadn't bothered to plan what to do next. Meanwhile, he tried to plant a false trail. By telling others he'd seen Miley leaving the complex, he may have hoped to delay suspicion and keep police from knocking on his door. A predator next door. When it came to Robert Major's motives, there were no simple answers. Investigators never released his full confession, only fragments, enough to fuel speculation, but not enough to paint the entire picture. The motive for killing Miley was tragically clear. He took pleasure in causing harm, and her murder was committed with the intent of sexual assault. Noah's death, however, was more baffling. Detectives theorized he may have killed the toddler to prevent identification, or perhaps Noah woke and began to cry, triggering Robert's fear that neighbors might hear. Whatever the case, psychiatrists agreed on one point. Robert's violence was driven by nothing more than the sadistic thrill of harming those weaker than himself, and his cruelty didn't end at the prison gates. During an earlier sentence, he attacked a cellmate, earning additional charges. Yet despite decades of predatory behavior and repeated psychiatric warnings, he was still released, and eventually vanished from police monitoring entirely. Canadians were horrified to learn the truth. Even if Robert had remained on the sex offender registry, the public would never have known. Unlike in the United States, Canada's registry is closed to ordinary citizens. The residents of Molly's building, including her family, who had moved in only 15 days earlier, had no idea a serial predator lived just steps away. The murders ignited public outrage and galvanized Miley's family. They began pushing for a new law, named in Noah's memory, that would keep repeat offenders under lifetime monitoring and create a public registry so families could know if a predator was living nearby. Robert, for his part, didn't bother denying his guilt in court. The trial moved quickly, but before sentencing, he delivered one last statement that stunned everyone in the room. He admitted he should remain behind bars forever because he feared what he might do if released. In the same breath, he insisted he still considered himself a good person. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. If he survives that long, he will be 78. Even then, there's no certainty he wouldn't still pose a threat. As for Noah's Law, progress has been agonizingly slow. Years later, the bill still hasn't passed, and no one knows if it ever will. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.